On many levels, the mid-1990s are a particularly interesting period in the history of electronic entertainment. Of course, by making this statement, I admit to carrying a baggage of certain nostalgia, however objective factors are also being at play here. For one, this was the time of great changes in the gaming industry. While these were the days of the still undisputed glory of the sprite-based 256-color VGA graphics and classic ways of storytelling, full-motion video technology as well as 3D graphics were already starting to slowly make their presence felt. The fourth generation of video gaming was increasingly giving way to its successor, and as many developers and designers were still exploring and searching for ways of creative and technical expression, it seemed like everything was possible. Things were getting bigger and more professional, while they were still small enough for nerdy passion to be the leading virtue. It was also a time when video games seemed to function in a somewhat schizophrenic plane of the consciousness of global pop culture. While the medium was still being widely regarded as something niche and directed primarily at a relatively small group of enthusiasts, every now and then there would appear a title that would cause enough impact to become widely noticed also outside the gaming community. By 1994, the gaming world was already familiar with the controversy surrounding titles like Doom and Mortal Kombat. However, this year also marks the inception date of a title that takes its audience much deeper into the dark, twisted territories of whatever's out there and proves that violence is not the only way to cause a scandal. The Beginning. Produced by Creative Reality, a Gosport England-based studio previously known for its games on the Commodore 64 machines and released in 1994 for PC and Amiga by Empire Interactive, Dreamweb is a game that by all rights of logic and economy should have never happened. Developed for nearly 3 years by Neil Dodwell and David Dew, the game was technically obsolete and conceptually backward already by the time of its launch. With its simplistic graphics reminiscent of the Alien Breed series and gameplay mechanics that appear as rather basic when compared to its contemporaries, Dreamweb was not exactly able to compete with the likes of King's Quest VII, Beneath a Steel Sky, or even Shadow of the Comet that was released 1 year prior. The poor optimization of the PC port, on the other hand, was making it somewhat difficult to play the game on the X386 machines upon its release. These flaws were obvious back then and remain rather obvious today. It is, however, important to get them out of the way at the beginning, as they have never managed to actually overshadow the intense quality of the experience provided by this title. Despite its shortcomings, Dreamweb remains one of the most heavy-hitting experiments in interactive storytelling of the mid-1990s and constitutes a classic example of an underdog in the adventure games genre. Atmosphere. Dank, depressing atmosphere of utter hopelessness and self-doubt. Atmosphere created by corrosive pollution, caustic fumes of fear, by crippling anxiety and paralyzing desperation. Dreamweb is unrivaled when it comes to evoking such emotions, with its opening credits reminiscent of the title sequence from Blade Runner and its lore focusing on a delicate balance between the forces operating within our universe. Dreamweb delivers a tale of severe alienation and impending doom. Enter Ryan, a troubled, insomniac young man living in a gritty, nameless city, drenched in toxic rain and vague cyberpunk setting taken straight from a William Gibson novel. The man is being haunted by reoccurring dreams in which a robed figure implores him to save the world by killing 7 people who are said to possess destructive powers. As Ryan decides to listen to the voices in his head, the players get to join him on what can only be described as a gory, albeit extremely pixelated, killing spree. Despite the setting suggesting a lot of intense situations and the obvious nods to the top-down action genre in terms of its visual presentation, Dreamweb is a rather classic point-and-click adventure game. Classic in this regard that some objects can be interacted with, certain puzzles require the use of inventory items, and Ryan can engage in conversation with other characters inhabiting the wretched city. This is actually a good moment to note that it is never made particularly clear just exactly where or even when Dreamweb takes place. Based on the pieces of information found within the game's world, one can only assume that the story takes place in a dystopian future, while the terminology, expressions and even the accents of some of the NPCs suggest that the city is located somewhere in the UK. These indications are really small, to be honest. At times, quite British-sounding expressions like bonnet or rubbish chute punctuate the otherwise neutral narration, but this can be purely accidental. In example, Ryan's bank account information mentions the federal law, so maybe it has been all written in an intentionally ambiguous manner. One thing is certain: wherever the city is located, it sure is an awful place. Unemployment rates are peaking, poverty and pathology plague the society, the seemingly omnipresent rain soaks skin to the bone, and everything looks worn down and used, implying several years of neglect and rough treatment. I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise that it's not difficult for Ryan to get his hands on a gun in a place like this. And this, quite honestly, is where Dreamweb differs the most from other adventure games. While the majority of its contemporaries were focusing on more or less complex puzzles involving interactions with items, objects and characters, it goes without saying that Dreamweb, even though there are literally dozens of objects that Ryan can pick up and store in his inventory, places its faith in the unrestricted use of firepower and creative violence. After all, murder is the name of the game here, and this is a story of a deranged serial killer, right? One could assume so. Or not. I don't know. I guess it all comes down to how one decides to look at the story and the actions of the protagonist. It is all very vague, very ambiguous, and a lot of blanks are being left to be filled by the players themselves. As stated earlier, Ryan is following the instructions of the mysterious robed figure urging him to kill. It is, however, never made clear if that person is anyhow real or simply a figment of Ryan's twisted imagination. It is actually interesting just how little the narration does in the lines of fleshing out the protagonist. I mean, we know of his dreams, sure, and early in the story, the audience gets introduced to both Ryan's girlfriend Eden and his junkie friendo Louis, as well as to his bartending job, but this is all pretty much as far as it goes. Additional, and even then, rather sparse information can only be deducted from seeing how Ryan reacts to certain things within the game's world. This is how we learn that he doesn't know a thing about cars, or that one of his favorite ways of relaxing is getting wasted. But hey, there is also the diary. We should not be forgetting about the diary. While the core of Dreamweb's creative team consisted of Neil Dodwell and David Dew, shortly before the end of the development cycle, the dynamic duo had been joined by a British writer, Stephen Marley, who penned an intriguing short story to accompany the game. The novel in question, titled Diary of a Mad Man, is written from Ryan's personal perspective and provides some further insight into the man's psyche. One can find a lot of really dark and complex stuff in there, as Marley seems to have done his absolute best to add some greater context to Ryan's story that, after all, is supposedly about saving the world. Hell, Marley even goes as far as to connect the Dreamweb with the ancient myth of the seven sleepers of Ephesus, and if this doesn't prove attention to detail, I don't know what does. However, the question that naturally rises here is, does the diary provide clear answers on what exactly is going on in Dreamweb or inside Ryan's mind? No, it doesn't. It seems, in fact, that the writer himself was trying to keep things as ambiguous as possible. In the interview given to RetroActionMagazine.com in June of 2011, Stephen Marley has been noted to say the following: "What I was looking for the prequel was ambivalence. Is Ryan homicidally insane, or a regular guy who's being used as a pawn by otherworldly powers? I made the decision that even I didn't know which of those options was true, hence the question mark in the title." So there, the audience can interpret the story however they want. As for me, I would say it is worth reading not only for the information value, but also due to certain bits of information included in the diary serving as the game's rather creative copy protection. While I'm generally not a big fan of having to use some additional media in order to enjoy a video game, I have to admit that the route chosen by Creative Reality strikes me as one that actually aids the user's immersion in the experience. Into madness. Even today, Dreamweb literally oozes with a clear concept and passion of its creators. As the game never was a technical powerhouse, it didn't age all that bad, and today it looks as pixelated as it did when it was originally released over 20 years ago. At least in my opinion, David Du's approach to the visual aspect of things has a particular charm that somehow emphasizes the grittiness of the portrayed world. Also, the fact that graphics of Dreamweb are somewhat simple actually stimulates the imagination. Of course, one could argue that the core concept behind the game's graphics elevates the proverbial pixel hunting to a whole new level, and to a degree this is absolutely correct, but at the same time one could also argue that this original approach creates a rather unique experience. So there's that. And then there's the sound and music, especially the music. Composed by Matt Seldon, it strikes me as absolutely stellar. The constant shimmering of rain is supported by moody electronic tracks, and I firmly believe that Dreamweb's soundtrack plays a huge role in creating the game's identity and in establishing its feel. The sound effects were designed by both the game's soundtrack composer and Richard Yap, who was also Dreamweb's producer. Sound effects used in the game are not exactly rich, but the ones present are definitely memorable. From the crackling of Ryan's energy pistol, through the ambient noise of Sparky's bar, to the squeaking of a certain wheel, it's all very solid stuff. Unfortunately, it is not possible to similarly praise the game's voiceovers. Dreamweb was originally released on 3.5-inch floppy disks, and the OG version of the game only seldom contained speech. This, however, changed drastically when the game has been re-released in the CD-ROM format. And man oh man, comparing the floppy and the optical disc versions of the game, one can quite easily see just how much of a Wild West thing was happening in terms of the standards of sound design back in the day. Even though Dreamweb's voiceovers have been recorded in a professional studio, at the now defunct Videosonics Limited Sound Studio at London's Camden District to be exact, the majority of the contracted talents were not professionals. This obviously leads to rather inconsistent quality levels of the delivered lines, but also the mixing itself does cause the brow to raise at times. A part of the final confrontation, it is not horrible or even especially annoying, but it is definitely noticeable and shows just how much evolution happens in this field of game development. It is also worth noting that not all the lines one would expect to be fully voiced over have received this treatment. It is difficult to tell just why exactly things went this way, but it certainly does show up from time to time. Hell, it is almost controversial. Oh yeah, the promised controversy. It has been already mentioned that Dreamweb has caused a certain backlash when it was originally released. One could assume that a game telling the story of a serial killer who supposedly acts on behalf of some higher force would cause scandal due to its numerous scenes of violence, heads being shot off, people being squashed, dismembered and so on, but no. Actually, no. The controversy has been caused by pixelated frontal male nudity, which has led to the game having to be censored in order to be released in countries like Australia. The censorship didn't affect any of the gory death scenes, but these 2 pixels of David Crane's junk were considered such a huge threat to morality that they had to be covered with black slips in some versions of the game. Even though, before and after that particular scene, the audience is exposed to numerous scenes of creative gore. And even though Dreamweb shows completely uncensored female nudity several scenes later. Oh, double standards. One way or another, the version of the game available currently on the site of the Scam virtual machine comes without any moral or technical restrictions. Yes, Dreamweb has been re-released in October of 2012 as freeware, so nothing stands in the way of getting one's purity in danger. Is Dreamweb a good game then? As one can see for themselves, it is definitely not a technical marvel, and both the gameplay mechanics and the story itself are not without their flaws. There are numerous points of no return, quite a bit of trial and error, and it is not exactly difficult to get the game into an unwinnable state. A significant portion of the game's potential appears to have been lost somewhere along the development process, and the examples are numerous. Even though there are dozens of objects that Ryan can interact with, there are no multiple solutions to puzzles. The world could have been fleshed out much more too. Instead, the audience gets scraps of information, while there are numerous cartridges lying around, news channels and such within the game world to actually overload the users with information. Actually, reading through the news via in-game's basic internet is a daunting task due to the fact that there is no way to stop the scrolling text. That's kind of a sad blunder, especially that the game masterfully executes so many cryptic references to the classics of sci-fi and cyberpunk. Lastly, the story can be considered rather naive at times. It does attempt to do some social commentary and it does try to touch on some deeper subjects, but even though these efforts don't fall entirely flat, they surely don't feel as nothing more significant than video game stuff. But having all these faults totally in mind and absolutely admitting their weight, I still say that this is one of the most honest and hence charming productions from the adventure genre of the early to mid-1990s. Dreamweb blew my mind over 20 years ago when I was writing my very first review in a Polish paperback gaming magazine, and it still impresses me today, mostly with how hard it attempts to achieve certain things. Of course, it comes as no surprise that Dreamweb never became a financial success and currently is more of a cult classic than a traditionally understood good old game. The majority of the team responsible for the title has left the industry, even though Creative Reality did develop one more title after Dreamweb, a survival horror going by the name of Martian Gothic. The studio was closed shortly afterwards, and currently only Neil Dodwell appears to be still active as video games development specialist. He has been involved as a programmer and engineer in numerous installments in the GTA franchise, and it seems that the scope of his work has greatly increased since the relatively innocent times of 1994. Thanks to the internet though, the legacy of Creative Reality lives on and, as mentioned before, is available as freeware to download from numerous sites specializing in retro gaming. 20 years later. It would be amazing to see a modern remake of Dreamweb, a remake that would iron out the issues of the original and flesh the world out a bit more so that the whole experience could become stronger, more remarkable and just a bit more accessible. While I don't have a bloody idea how things look from the legal side, I know that the author of the Diary of the Mad Man, Stephen Marley, has expressed on numerous occasions his interest in participating in such a project. Maybe someone with investment money would be interested. If yes, count me in as well. One way or another, over 20 years after its original release, Dreamweb is definitely worth checking out, even if only to see just how much has changed in terms of dark and depressing storytelling in video games. It may be not the best game out there, but it is one of my personal favorites, and this has to count for something, right? Right. Hey, my name is Magic, and you've been watching Joints and Games. Until next time.